You mentioned before when we were talking that you were involved in the sunflower movement, you were part of the protests in the streets, and what was it like to be part of a kind of an activist movement that suddenly found itself involved in government, and can you describe some of the feelings of that time of getting involved in government?
Yeah. I think to me there is not much difference because to me I don't see the boundaries between like the conventional separation of first, second, third sector. To me, I would like to see myself not to be identified or associated to either of the segregation of those sectors. So I don't see there's much shift from being an activist to working in the government. But there is advantage working in the government. For example, if we want to push certain policy agenda, it's easy to do it within the government to find stakeholders to work with and then to really push the agenda. Whereas, I mean, it depends on people's personal experiences as well. But for my personal experience, I find it I find it easier to actually work in the government to push certain policy agenda. But actually, I'm contradicting myself as well because I also see the limitation. I want to mention one of the performance art I really like when I was in Taiwan, done by Cocoism. So one of the director of Cocoism hosted a participatory processes as a performance in Taipei during an art festival, and really replicating the process of how parliament works and how voting works. And I find it really, really liberating because if we operate in a conventional government setup, for example, people go to assemblies or consultations, they have their own agenda and they go there to advocate for the things they believe in. And then sometimes in that kind of setup, people would be conflicting to each other, where there is more kind of, it's difficult to have collaboration. Like people don't see themselves as with each other as friends, but they want to go there to advocate and they really want to share their views, which is good. But what we want to advocate is that we want people to be able to work with each other, even they come from different perspectives. That's even better because then we can find the response or responses that actually work for everyone, even though it's not perfect. Sure. The reason why I talk about the performance art is that I find there are opportunities of civic space set up for political activity, which people will go there, like it's part of their after work leisure, but they also involve in the deliberation of topics in a more relaxed and more like they are able to actually absorb those informations that is critical to environment and society. And I find that space and the space for imagination is actually quite liberating in the performance civic space, where I find missing in the conventional government political setup. And I really want to bridge the benefit I mentioned of working in the government to be able to actually have resources to negotiate with different stakeholders, but a little bit lacking of the kind of breathing space for imagination and collaboration, and how we can integrate the conventional government setup as well as the civic setup to imagine a society where everyone is an agent and they are able to imagine a different society, and that is possible.
Very interesting, yeah. The sort of changing the context, because often I don't know if this is what you were sort of getting at here, but like sort of political, democratic spaces can often be sort of very heady, and like not engage our whole being. And you know, if we want to imagine a different society or create something different, we need to engage different aspects of ourselves and also that sort of human relational element that isn't found sometimes in these more, I don't know, more sort of political space somehow. But I don't know, that's my interpretation. But
yeah, that's why the PO network Fang is very pretty much engaged in. It's all about bringing more civic spaces in the government, right? Why don't you talk about that?
So I would say it's expanding the conventional practice a bit more open. But I still feel like there is a lacking of that kind of emotional space in there, because we still have to operate in a more kind of, because it's initially government initiative. So we have a specific role to play, and the people who come to those spaces, they would have a predetermined, they basically have a role to play in that space. Obviously, we want, the reason why we exist, or why we're working in that space of orchestrating the PO participation officer network is to try to break down the silos in the government and inviting more participation in the wider society. But I still feel like there's still rooms to be improved, to push more of the imaginative space. I feel like there's a different setup, and people need to bring themselves to the space without this kind of predetermined norm of how you should play in the government meeting.
Yes. Yeah. That's what we kind of co-wrote this article about democratic innovation, and in the first abstract, Fang put a very strong emphasis on the idea of everyone should represent themselves as an active agent instead of playing a role of different sectors. Like, for example, even if I work in the government, I was also a citizen, and I can also be a very creative person. I don't have to really just representing the kind of public-facing side of myself, but I can really be a normal individual who just want to engage in this topic. Even for people who are like maybe from NGO, they can also be talking for or thinking for the different sides. So this idea of cross-sector or not thinking about which sector we come from.
Going back to the earlier point around not bounded ourselves within specific sectorial setup.
Would you say this mindset also was a learning from your transition from the society to after working in the government, or you didn't?
Yeah, I think I have that transition from working in the government towards working in an NGO at Dark Matter Labs, because we want to push for a structural transition in a society, rethinking unconstituting and reconstituting the society, and then thinking about how we can have alternative economic models for a just society and environment. So coming from that angle make me reflect a lot around what would be the best leverage point or a suitable setup for us to operate in. And I found seeing ourselves as active agents is really helpful. Maybe that also reflects on my personal transition and looking at my position in my role in the society and the environment, and then really reflecting what's my role within this. And I find that I cannot attach myself to a specific sector, and then that's where I want to operate in. So I personally call it as a civic space, but obviously there probably would be a better framing for this. But I currently call it like civic space or civic society.
Maybe there'll be a new term you'll come up with that encapsulates it better at some point.
So how do we work with each other in this civic space or civic society.